Hi everybody, welcome back. This is lecture 4.2, the Assyrians. All right, well we have already had a preview of the Assyrian Empire, and we know that these are, or were, an aggressive group of warriors, a veritable military machine who conquered much of Egypt, parts of the Nubian or Kush Empire, as well as a fair portion of the Fertile Crescent, including Babylon. You remember that Mesopotamian city called Babylon?
By the rivers of Babylon, where he sat down, and there he wept, when he remembers Zion.
Anyway, the Assyrians are going to establish a well-organized empire, and they were really considered ruthless by those conquered, or at least those who managed to survive the conquest. Assyria's conquest of a good portion of the Middle East and North Africa started around 850 BC. The Assyrians are believed to have come from the northern part of Mesopotamia. Some of the most famous of the Assyrian kings included Sennacherib, who we've already learned, wait for it, was not a cherub. He often bragged about his conquests and killing. And we learned of his eventual annihilation of the city of Babylon because they failed to protect his son from assassination. To put it lightly, he was fairly brutal. As a result of his son's death and Sennacherib's subsequent destruction of Babylon, he declared that Babylon could not be rebuilt for 70 years as punishment. Later, we've already learned that Sennacherib's other son, Esarhaddon, he's going to rebuild Babylon after only 11 years, after finding a loophole on one of the cuneiform tablets. Mrs. Molly can't talk today. Anyway, Assyria's many conquests were due primarily to their military-based society. Life revolved around their military machine. Being a warrior was considered a prized vocation. We're going to see similar attitudes when we study the Spartans later. In any event, the Assyrians perfected military technology of the time period. They were part of the whole Iron Age, a period of time in which new technology allowed people to forge stronger metal, namely iron. Before this age was the Bronze Age, and weapons weren't as widespread or available to the general populations. But once ironworking technology was discovered, more people were able to produce weapons quickly. The Assyrians were able to efficiently use iron technology to create metal swords, helmets, leather skirts and loincloths that had iron scales attached. Basically for you football and hockey playing males out there, they were creating protective iron gear like sports cups, okay? Anyway, the Assyrians not only mastered ironworking technology, they were also master planners when it came to planning assaults on their enemies. They created war strategies like digging under city walls to weaken the fortifications, and then they developed battering rams to tear through their opponent's structures. These were all iron-tipped, by the way. They also developed pontoons, also known as floating structures that spanned bodies of water, like bridges. The Persians later adopted and perfected these pontoons. The Assyrians rarely allowed their enemies to surrender, preferring to massacre them instead. Occasionally, their opponents were allowed to surrender, but were exiled to faraway cities in the middle of nowhere. Between 850 and 650 BC, the Assyrians had amassed a pretty big territory. They even controlled parts of Anatolia, or Asia Minor. The Assyrians had a highly effective government system and a transportation network. Their system of having local governors report to higher governors created a highly organized administrative system. The people who were conquered by the Assyrians were often forced to pay tribute to them. People who refused to pay tribute or their taxes were exiled or annihilated. One of the most famous of the Assyrian kings was a man named Ashurbanipal. His capital was at a city called Nineveh. Nineveh was first established, if you remember, by Sennacherib after he burned Babylon to the ground. King Ashurbanipal is remembered for the vast personal library that he created, which included ancient Sumerian literature like the Epic of Gilgamesh. This library was one of the first real libraries in recorded history and was so well organized. King Ashurbanipal's library was organized using a system not unlike the Dewey Decimal System in modern library systems. The Assyrians were also well known for the artwork that they created, including what we call stone reliefs. Reliefs are stone carvings where a picture is created by carving directly on a wall or directly on the face of a large stone surface. These stone reliefs often depicted war scenes and the Assyrians' conquest. The Assyrians were conquered by the Medes and the Chaldeans. The Medes and the Chaldeans conquered the Assyrians around 612 BC. Many people were more than willing to praise the Medes and Chaldeans for this conquest, especially those people who had suffered at the hands of the Assyrians, or those who had been brutalized by the Assyrians. Many passages of the Bible and the Torah recount this takeover by the Medes and the Chaldeans, and the people are clearly rejoicing at the news according to these passages. The Chaldeans later reestablished a capital at Babylon.
By the rivers of Babylon.
Their most famous king was Nebuchadnezzar, who was perhaps best known for the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the original 7 wonders of the ancient world. Apparently, this was created to please one of Nebuchadnezzar's wives, who was really homesick. The Chaldeans were also known for their study of the planets and stars, aka astronomy. Later on, the Chaldeans were conquered by the Persians. The Persians' tolerance was a far cry from the Assyrian rule and helped free Babylon from Chaldean rule. The Babylonian captivity, as it was called, ended with Cyrus the Great retaking the city. But more on that later. Thanks for listening. Bye.
By the rivers of Babylon.